listening to the Mo.news podcast. I'm mo.news.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, how was your weekend?
We kids bopped. We danced.
Wait, kids bop. You turned it into a verb.
Yes,
you attended an event called Kids Bop, yes.
Yes, we went to the Kids Bop concert at Jones Beach on Long Island. And I think they got through most of the show until it started storming. And I'm pretty sure you probably experienced it where you are in Brooklyn, and then it came over to us. So
yeah,
it was fun,
these
though.
August humid days where it could rain at any given moment. And depending on where you are in the Northeast, you might be completely in the clear or completely getting soaked.
Moshe, how was your weekend?
It was good. Actually, speaking of rain, I had to go rescue Olivia and the babysitter who were caught in the storm. They were standing under scaffolding. So I came out because they were rolling back and then the storm came in very quick. And so I rolled over with several umbrellas, a cover for the stroller. Olivia was a cool cucumber, though, at 10 months old. She was just like, I guess I have a plastic cover over me. That's cool. I'm enjoying this view. And we got them home dry.
I always had a love-hate relationship with scaffolding in the city.
Right. There's scaffolding every other block. And if you work in news, you know, there's just too many like horror stories to talk about. And yet it saves you every time there's snow and rain.
Yes. Yeah. When there's bad weather, there's nothing better. Meanwhile, we've got a new podcast out on the interview feed. Moshe, tell us about it.
Yeah, so obviously Friday we covered that major news, the prisoner exchange with Russia, 7 countries, 26 people. You might have heard a recent interview pod with Mickey Bergman, one of the negotiators who works on behalf of families. He was actually with the Russians when they got notice that the Americans had made this proposal. So he breaks it all down for us. It's an insider's view of the prisoner exchange, why Putin made the deal now, what it says about what he thinks about Trump, Biden, Kamala Harris. It's fascinating. So it's a great follow-up to the pod that we did recently. If you're not already listening to the Mo.news interview pod, we're having some really interesting conversations over there. A new one out today. If you want to dive deep into the prisoner exchange, take a listen. Mo.news interview pod.
All right, now to the headlines. The Veeps VP countdown, what we know about Kamala Harris's big decision in the next 24 hours. And some new polls on the state of the presidential race.
Jill, it's the political version of The Bachelorette. All the governors making their visit this weekend to make their pitch.
But who will get the rose?
Exactly.
A reversal in Guantanamo. We told you about a deal last week with several 9/11 plotters. Well, the deal is no more. We'll tell you what happened. Hurricane-strength winds set to arrive today in Florida with the latest storm, Debby, and a warning to South Carolina and Georgia about the potential for record flooding in the coming days. Overseas, Iran could respond as soon as today to the apparent assassination by Israel of the Hamas leader in Tehran. We're going to have the latest from the Middle East. Plus, the state of the protests in Venezuela a week after a questionable election, and still no official results have been released by the regime. Some new jobs numbers out Friday have economists worried about a recession here in the United States, what it means for interest rates and the stock market. And an update from the Olympics, where the U.S. had a huge weekend in the pool, on the track, and Simone Biles continuing to make history in the gymnastics arena. Moshe, everyone I know, obsessed with the Olympics this year.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt that the U.S. is really having a remarkable run.
And Moshe is on this day in history.
Jill, your clue today, we've been on the run, driving in the sun, looking out for number 1.
I have no clue.
Jill, I feel like there's some millennials listening right now who do know that clue.
And they'll have thoughts. Okay.
It might be your elder millennial status that is hurting you here.
Slash cusper of
Gen X cusper, yeah.
All right, let's start with the biggest political news that we expect this week, Kamala Harris's vice presidential selection. So we'll likely know who she's going to pick within the next 24 hours. Harris met with her 6 finalists this weekend as she gets to select her own VP. So we've got 4 governors, 1 senator, and 1 cabinet secretary. Among the 3 she had at her home in D.C. on Sunday, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, And Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, we expect to have an announcement by tomorrow afternoon or evening, and that's when she's going to appear with her running mate for the very first time at a rally in Philadelphia to kick off their Battleground State Tour. We've discussed a few of the people that she's been vetting in recent weeks, but here is a final list of the contenders who offer Harris a really unique way to balance out her ticket. So she's reportedly looking for what they call the 3 C's: competence, chemistry, and core values, Moshe. That's what's important.
Jill, it's the same way we created this podcast. We looked for competence, chemistry, and core values, and we found one another.
Okay, so among the finalists, you've got Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear. He won an election and a re-election in a very red state, which shows off his ability to appeal to voters outside of his own party and within rural areas of the country. Then you've got Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. He is a popular governor in a state that could really help solidify a win in arguably the most important swing state in this election.
Yeah, Pennsylvania has 19 electoral votes, key to a win in November.
He also has an approval rating above 60%, which is pretty unprecedented in these partisan times. He's charismatic. He's viewed as more moderate, which could be an asset for winning over independent voters. His leadership's also been praised in his handling of a number of crises, including the I-95 bridge collapse in Philadelphia last June. Then you've got Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. He chairs the Democratic Governors Association, which has been posting a record-breaking fundraising haul this year. He's a veteran, loyal Democrat. He's unlikely to make any waves for Harris for the ticket to deal with. And he's also represented a very conservative district in Congress before becoming a little bit more liberal as governor. And he's also just really good in TV interviews. And then there's Arizona Senator Mark Kelly. He could drum up Democratic support in another key battleground state that saw a bitterly competitive 2020 election that Biden won by just 0.3 percentage points. Kelly represents a border state, which would also give a boost to the ticket when it comes to immigration, which is one of Harris's biggest vulnerabilities.
Yeah, we've mentioned Mark Kelly actually as a Democrat was critical of Biden and Harris and their immigration policy, so he can give them a little more credibility there. He was one of those, as you mentioned, that was over at the VP mansion in D.C. on Sunday, making his pitch, ostensibly. He's married to Gabby Giffords. He's a former astronaut. He's a former naval pilot. Now, notably, as a senator, he hasn't run anything before, unlike these governors we're talking about who have run states. And so if that's something she's looking for here, certainly that would be a minus column for him, though he has been talked about for a while here, is well liked. And so totally could be the choice in the next 24 hours. There's a couple other names that have been thrown about here. I would be completely surprised if they somehow come through in the end. You have Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. He ran for president against Harris and Biden in 2020. At 42, he's the youngest of the bunch. Remember, he did better than expected in those primaries in 2020. He actually did better than Harris did, making it to Iowa, winning Iowa. And so there is that. He also, in the administration, has served a key role here. He's also one of those potential Veeps that is very good on television. He has a lot of clips on Fox News pushing back on conservatives and arguments against the administration. So certainly would be a fighter for her on the ticket. And then you have J.B. Pritzker. He's the governor of Illinois. He signed a number of pieces of legislation in Illinois, a ban on assault weapons, ghost guns. He also increased the state's minimum wage. Now, Illinois is a solidly blue state. There's no chance that he helps in any case there, but he is known in the region, so potentially could help in campaigning in the Michigans, the Wisconsins, the Pennsylvanias of the world. Not as much as Shapiro, but still potentially there. You also have the fact that Pritzker, whose family owns the Hyatt hotel chain, is worth $3.5 billion with a B. So financially, if she needed some extra donation or help in the end, having him on the ticket wouldn't hurt.
What's a few $1 billion amongst friends, Moshe?
Two arguments there, right? Could be helpful. At the same time, we know of somebody who spent $1 billion in 100 days in 2020 named Mike Bloomberg, and had basically nothing to show for it. So money can be helpful. Remember in 2016, Hillary outspent Trump. Trump won. In 2020, Biden outspent Trump. Biden won. So mixed record in terms of does the amount of dollars you spent actually equal a victory in November. Now, as far as timing here, we're not going to know until she decides if she's deciding, and given the last second nature of this, I wouldn't be surprised if she woke up this morning still debating who her VP should be. They're very nervous about this leaking out. They want to have that element of surprise. So, look for a lot of speculation online. This person canceled this. This person canceled this. We're tracking a plane that's flying from Kentucky to Pennsylvania. Is Governor Beshear on that plane? A lot of that in the next 24 hours. At the end of the day, in the next 36 hours, you're going to know they're going to have that rally in Philly, and that'll be the VP person, and that'll be the peak moment when all of us care about it for a hot second. By the time we wake up on Wednesday, we'll tell you about it. By Thursday, we really won't be talking about it anymore if she's done her job. Because the thing you need to do when you pick your VP is not mess it up and not have somebody who brings you down. Net, they don't really impact that much. All this talk about they could help here. We know how 99% of voters are voting. They're voting based on the top of the ticket.
All right, Moshe, given all that, what's your prediction? Who's your prediction?
It's hard to tell because, we don't know much about Kamala Harris's stances and decision-making because she's been VP for Biden for 3.5 years, right? So this will really tell us a lot about where she stands, where she sees her vulnerabilities, what this says about her. You really are asking me to just go off of the pure speculation. I think that she probably would be well served by any of these folks. I do think that in this day and age, given that Trump is trying to make the case, that she's a progressive, that she's liberal, that she's from California, all true at various points in her career, she would be well served by going with a more moderate Shapiro or Kelly or Beshear. So I think that those three all potentially could help her in a variety of ways. And honestly, we're not going to know everything because they've done vetting. They have Eric Holder, the former Obama Attorney General, vetting these folks and looking into their past. We might know stuff. They might dig up something that we don't know, being like, you know what, if that comes out, that's a problem for us.
Moshe, you make a really good point, though, about how we don't know that much about Kamala Harris because she also didn't go through a normal primary where she did debates.
She in 2020 did some primary debates, but her campaign ended before the Iowa caucuses. No one ever got a chance to vote for Kamala Harris. So there wasn't a thorough kind of sort of public vetting. And at the end of the day, it becomes about the top of the ticket, which is one of the reasons why this weekend we were, a bunch of us, a bit surprised when a story came out in the Daily Mail and the tabloid that Doug Emhoff, Vice President Harris's husband, apparently had an affair in his first marriage and actually impregnated the woman he was having an affair with, the teacher of one of his daughters. And so this came out in the Daily Mail over the weekend. You had Doug Emhoff confirming it in a statement. A reminder, this again was in his first marriage before Kamala Harris. Apparently Kamala Harris knew about this. The Biden campaign knew about this in 2020, but it is now coming out. The statement from Doug Emhoff The statement from Doug Emhoff reads, "During my first marriage, Kirsten," that's his first wife, "and I went through tough times on account of my actions. I took responsibility, and in the years since, we worked through things as a family and have come out stronger."
This report, Moshe, was shocking. I think just because at this point, Kamala Harris she's been the vice president now for almost 4 years. It's like, how is this just coming out?
It's a spouse, right? It's a spouse's previous marriage, but you would think that like a political opponent in a previous election might have dug it up. At the end of the day, again, he acknowledges here he had a relationship with one of his then young daughter's teachers. It resulted in the end in a pregnancy. She did not keep the child, according to a friend. The relationship ended years before Emhoff ended up dating Kamala Harris. You also had the ex-wife put out a statement saying it ended for a variety of reasons many years ago. He's a great father to our kids. So they all are, very
kumbaya.
Yes, they're all being very civil and kumbaya together. He says he's regretted the circumstances, that he was aware this could become public. At the same time, how significant will this be? Probably not, right? At the end of the day, Kamala Harris is running against Donald Trump, who has been unfaithful to all three of his wives very publicly, including Melania. So I'm not sure that, especially given that, again, Doug is the husband of Kamala Harris, and this is a previous marriage, that's going to matter that much. But it goes to what Kamala Harris is trying to dig up on any of the VP folks that she's choosing, which is like, what have you been involved in financially? What has gone on legally? what has gone on personally. You have some very personal questions to get to the bottom there. J.D. Vance actually did an interview over the weekend where he talked about the questions he got in the Trump vet because, again, they're trying to ensure they're aware of everything, so there's no surprises that come out once you choose, and they're picking up the New York Times a couple days later, and they're seeing some sort of scoop.
My prediction, Moshe, take it or leave it, Governor Tim Walz.
All right, so if we're doing this, I'm going Shapiro, you go Walz. That's my gut.
Winner gets a Mo.news mug.
Winner next time you're in New York City, Jill, buys the other dinner.
You done.
Okay. All this VP talk comes as we got some new polls out over the weekend. CBS News had a poll out on Sunday that finds Kamala Harris is now holding a 1-point advantage over Trump nationwide. That's something Biden has never had this entire election. And keep in mind that Democrats typically have a national polling advantage. Like if we had a national election, like most other democracies do, Democrats have a slight advantage. But of course, we have the Electoral College. You need swing states. In that, right now, Harris and Trump are tied according to the CBS poll. So it is neck and neck right now, an effective tie with about 90 days to go here. They looked into some of the numbers as to what voters see in Harris, what voters see in Trump. Right now, Harris is ahead of Trump when it comes to asking who's more energetic, who's more focused. Those, by the way, were also issues that Biden lost on. She's even with Trump on competence, and she's closer than Biden was, though Trump still holds an advantage on who is tougher and who is more effective. Trump right now beating Harris by a slightly smaller amount than he was leading Biden on. But when it comes to issues, top two issues, economy, immigration, Trump is still leading. So at the end of the day, with all these polls showing an effective tie here, Trump still net advantage Trump. And Harris acknowledges this, that she still perceives herself to be the underdog here.
And then there's the question about whether Harris and Trump are going to debate each other. So we could call this a debate over the debate.
Yes.
The Harris campaign is pushing for the original September 10th debate on ABC that both sides agreed to. And they want this to go on as scheduled, even though Joe Biden has exited the race. Trump said the debate was terminated, his word, when Biden dropped out. Harris says she's going to be there on the 10th and take the platform regardless, saying it is interesting how Trump's claim that he would debate her, quote, anytime, any place became one specific time and one specific safe space. That safe space, Moshe, Fox News. The Trump campaign is calling for a new debate hosted by Fox News. He said he agreed to Fox News's proposal for a debate on September 4th. That would be in Pennsylvania, a battleground state with similar rules to his debate against Biden. He wrote on Truth Social, if for any reason Kamala is unwilling or unable to debate on that date, I have agreed with Fox to do a major town hall on the same September 4th evening.
Yeah, so bottom line, there was a second debate scheduled with Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Once Biden got out, Trump said, maybe I'll drop out of this too, and instead do it on my more favorite network, Fox. He's also noting that he's suing ABC News right now, which would host that September 10th debate. He, by the way, was suing ABC before he agreed to debate on ABC, specifically George Stephanopoulos, who noted on his show that Trump had raped somebody. Trump has been found liable of sexual abuse in that E. Jean Carroll columnist suit. And the judge in that case said, effectively, what we found here can be perceived to be rape. And so Stephanopoulos used that term. Right now, Trump is suing him for defamation. So he wants something to do with ABC. In general, he says, Kamala Harris says, no, you agreed to a debate. Trump's like, no, I agreed to a debate with Biden. So it's going all back and forth. He puts out a statement. We'll see what happens here. Given the dynamic of this election, you sort of think that Harris needs the debate more than Trump does. So she might end up having to move towards Trump here. At least that's my perception. That's my analysis here on August 5th. Though notably, Trump put out this September 4th Fox News date. Fox News had invited him to a September 17th date. So he just sort of like picked his own date, picked his network, threw it out there. So we'll see. There's two networks. There's 3 dates. But we'll see what they come back with.
Regardless, we'll be watching, whatever it is, whoever shows up.
Most nights in September, we're available to watch this debate.
Okay, switching gears, in a surprise move late Friday, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin overruled the overseer of the war court at Guantanamo Bay and revoked a plea agreement reached earlier last week with the accused mastermind of the September 11th, 2001 attacks and 2 alleged accomplices. So the Pentagon announced this decision with a memorandum relieving the senior Defense Department official responsible for military commissions of her oversight of the capital case against Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and his alleged accomplices for the attacks that killed nearly 3,000 people in New York City, at the Pentagon, and in a Pennsylvania field. The overseer was retired Brigadier General Susan Escalier. She had signed a pre-trial agreement on Wednesday with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Walid bin Attash, and Mustafa al-Hawsawi that exchanged guilty pleas for sentences of at most life in prison. So in taking away the authority, Austin assumed direct oversight of the case and canceled the agreement, effectively reinstating it as a death penalty case. So that is the takeaway here. And he left Escalier in the role of Guantanamo's other cases. Austin said in an order released Friday night by the Pentagon that because of the stakes involved, the responsibility for such a decision should rest with him.
Yeah, this whole deal was surprising to many of us who've been watching this because they've been working on a deal for a very long time. And the defense secretary was out of the country for a couple of days last week, apparently came back and was like, no, we are not doing a deal with these 9/11 plotters. We're going to continue to pursue them in court, even though they've been working on this for more than a decade and haven't quite figured out how they're going to pursue a case against these guys. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that the family members of the 9/11 victims had expressed a lot of anger over this deal. So they appear pleased. The defense secretary stepped in here and said, no, there's no deal. We're going to take these guys to court no matter what it takes. But it still leaves uncertain what the next steps are when it comes to the prosecution over a terror attack that took place 23 years ago. Before this week's developments, before the plea deal was signed, jury selection in the what is expected to be a 1.5-year trial was not envisioned to start till 2026. So 2 more years, they were going to start jury selection, meaning the verdict could be in 2027 or 2028. And there's been a whole bunch of pretrial proceedings that have been at issue here, which is why it appears they initially struck this plea deal, right? You have the torture of these guys, significant torture in secret CIA prisons through the years that effectively contaminated evidence against them. They've made confessions, but they did it while being tortured. So there are major questions here about whether they could actually use much of the evidence that they have against these guys in court. Some of these guys have been held for more than 2 decades. Jill, remember, 9/11 happened in 2001. We're in the year 2024 now. There's a lot of complexity here, a lot of legal issues here, and the whole GTMO thing, if you break it down by numbers, goes like this. It's been around for about 20 years. There were initially 780 guys there. Bush transferred out of 540. Many of them were picked up on the battlefield, turned out not to really be related to things. And then the U.S. had to find places to send them. So Bush sends home 540 of the 780. Obama sends home 200 of them. And then Trump sends home 1. Biden clears 6. And now there's 30 left. Of the 30 that are left, 16 have actually been cleared of charges. We just don't know where to send them because there's no country that wants to accept them. We don't want to release them inside the U.S. Their home countries won't take them. So right now, U.S. taxpayers are paying $13 million a year per prisoner for the 30 guys who are there, 16 of whom have been cleared. Right now, it's the costliest prison in the world. We're spending about $600 million a year on GTMO. So you have these 3 guys who clearly there's enough evidence to go on. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was effectively the planner of 9/11. Bin Laden made him like the guy. And he's like, hey, you know what we should do? Use planes. And Bin Laden was like, oh, that's a great idea. Go with it, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. And he's the one who recruited the hijackers, really put the plot together. But then again, he was waterboarded. He was tortured, which makes the legal process difficult. So this is where we stand now. They've canceled the deal. The defense secretary has taken this over. You got 6 months left of the Biden administration. What comes next is unclear, but it just sort of continues the saga of 9/11 now, 23 years later.
Time now for the speed read from CNN. Tropical storm Debby could rapidly intensify into a hurricane before it makes landfall today in Florida's Big Bend region and bring potentially historic amounts of rainfall to parts of the southeast. It is taking advantage of near record warm waters in the Gulf of Mexico. Hurricane Debby is expected to make landfall today in Florida's Big Bend region and bring potentially historic amounts of rainfall to parts of the southeast. It's taking advantage of near record warm waters in the Gulf of Mexico. Authorities in Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina are urging residents to prepare as the storm makes its way through the Gulf, with Debby undergoing rapid intensification. So that happens when a storm's top-end winds increase 35 miles per hour in just 24 hours. The storm is forecast to reach the coast of Florida's Big Bend this morning. That is on the west coast, the area between the Panhandle and Tampa. After that, Debby is expected to crawl across northern Florida and southern Georgia throughout the day and into tomorrow. The main threat will be flooding, both from storm surges of up to 10 feet and heavy rainfall. Freshwater flooding, which is caused by rainfall, has become the deadliest aspect of tropical systems in the last decade, according to research conducted by the National Hurricane Center.
Yeah, if you live through Harvey in Houston, you know that it's that rainfall, not necessarily the winds with the hurricane, that caused the most destruction. In Florida right now, the governor, Ron DeSantis, has called on residents to finish their preparations ASAP and to brace for power outages, particularly in areas like Tallahassee. There's going to be a lot of trees falling down. He says you're going to have debris, you're going to have some power interruptions, so be ready in the northern part of Florida there. President Biden already preemptively on Sunday approved a disaster declaration for Florida, so that will authorize federal resources to get there ASAP. One of the big concerns is not necessarily Florida, but between South Carolina and Georgia, specifically the area between Charleston, South Carolina, and Savannah, Georgia. Debby will be very slow moving, and they say that that area on the coast there could see more than 2 feet of rain. The heaviest rain amounts could even top 30 inches right now, depending on how long Debby takes to make its way through the region. And the concern is that it could sit over South Carolina and Georgia for 2 days through Thursday even. So beware there. Take precautions, go to higher land, especially if you're on that coast there.
All right, now let's head overseas from the Associated Press. The U.S. general in charge of American forces in the Middle East arrived in the region this weekend as preparations continue for a possible attack against Israel from Iran in retaliation for the assassinations of senior Hamas and Hezbollah leaders. So you have General Michael Kurilla's trip to the region. It was actually planned before the recent escalation between Israel, Iran, and Hezbollah, but he is expected to use the trip to try to mobilize that same international coalition that defended Israel against an attack from Iran in April. Several U.S. and Israeli officials say they expect that Iran will attack Israel as early as today. Iranian and Hezbollah leaders have vowed to retaliate for the assassination of Hezbollah's top military commander, Fuad Shukr, and Hamas's political leader, Ismail Haniyeh. The Hamas killing took place in Tehran on the day of the Iranian presidential inauguration, which was a huge embarrassment to the Iranian regime. Some Western intelligence sources indicate that Iran and Hezbollah are planning to launch their retaliatory strike against Israel on the Jewish holiday of Tisha B'Av later this month. It is a day of fasting and mourning for the destruction of the two ancient Jewish temples in Jerusalem thousands of years ago. This year, the holiday begins on August 12th and it ends on August 13th. Iran's looking at several psychological and tactical considerations, so it may aim to revive historical trauma for Jews of destruction and uprooting, thereby amplifying the psychological impact of the attack on Israeli society.
Yeah, that's sort of the advantage Iran has right now is they say we're going to counterattack, but you don't know when and you don't know how. And so it could happen today. It could happen on this Jewish holiday. They could wait until the fall. Ultimately, given that there's a lot of infighting in the Israeli government right now, Iran might decide to wait and sort of watch it unfold and let them keep preparing and not be totally aware of what happens. They might have learned their lesson from the last time they launched an attack where the Iranians waited about 12 days. They then gave everyone a heads up. So the drones are coming. They had several hours heads up. And ultimately, the Israelis and the coalition knocked down basically every single rocket, missile, and drone that was shot their way. One reason to choose one of the Jewish holidays, especially that Tisha B'Av holiday, is that it signals that Israel is vulnerable to destruction. It commemorates the destruction of the Jewish temples thousands of years ago that led to Jews being expelled from the region. And so there's a lot of history they may be trying to invoke there, though. It could happen any day here, and we'll continue to monitor the situation. A report out of Gaza does say that the Hamas leader, Yahya Sinwar, who's underground right now, is planning on no ceasefire deal. In the interim, he's going to watch to see how this all unfolds between Hezbollah, Iran, and Israel. He's going to be sitting and watching it for now. It does come as there's tensions between the allies, the U.S. and the Israelis. A lot of reports over the weekend, Jill. You had President Biden in one report telling Prime Minister Netanyahu to stop, quote, bullshitting me during a phone conversation they had last week. Apparently, things are getting very tense between Netanyahu and Biden. Biden's very frustrated. He wants this war to come to an end in Gaza, and he feels that Netanyahu is doing his best not to bring it to an end and prolonging it unnecessarily. Now, Biden said on Thursday night that the assassinations have not been helpful. At the end of the day, the White House bears no sympathy for the killing of these terror leaders who, by the way, have American blood on their hands. He just feels the timing here wasn't helpful to trying to get a ceasefire deal done here. And so Netanyahu and Biden, of course, met when Netanyahu was in town in D.C. Apparently that was very tense at times. And at the end of the day, Biden told Netanyahu, don't take the president for granted. And he feels that Netanyahu feels like he's going to have backup from America no matter what he does. And he's taking advantage of that right now. So that's been a lot of the back and forth you've been seeing between those two. Then you have issues inside Israel. Within Israel, there are reports that Netanyahu might be firing the defense secretary, Gallant, as well as other top military and intel leaders in the coming weeks. He was actually planning on doing it before the Hezbollah strike because many of them have been very critical of his strategy. They feel that he needs to be taking a ceasefire deal ASAP with Hamas, that he is prolonging this, that there's an opportunity here post the assassinations to just strike a deal, end this thing. The Mossad chief, who's apparently been leading negotiations for the Israelis, said at a meeting last week, there were a lot of leaks out of this meeting, that there's a deal ready and Israel must take it. Netanyahu said, you're not negotiating well enough for me, negotiate harder. You can make a better deal. You guys are terrible negotiators. And so there's a lot of fighting coming out of these meetings. One person came out of that meeting saying Netanyahu's given up on the hostages. He just wants to prioritize the war here. He doesn't care if the hostages are alive. The Prime Minister's office denying that. Though, Jill, again, as we state all this, tensions within Israel, tensions between Israel and America. Of course, now chaos on the Hamas side with assassination. Iran figuring out its next steps, doesn't want all-out war, but is willing to risk it to get its vengeance for what took place in Tehran last week. A mess, a big mess.
Yes, apparently, as you mentioned, Yahya Sinwar kind of sitting back and just waiting to see how this all plays out before he decides what he's going to do in terms of any sort of ceasefire deal.
Yeah, he's sitting in a bunker in Gaza. As far as he's concerned, his goal with all of this is to start a large regional war, like the biggest war ever. And so he feels like he's closer to it than he's ever been. Also, Hania, he was no big fan of Hania, though they were allies at times. They both come from Gaza. So now, Yahya Sinwar moves up in the Hamas movement with Hania gone. And so there's a bunch of people that are considering to be the political leader who don't get along with Sinwar. He doesn't even like, he doesn't respect. And so ultimately, he's sitting back and watching it all unfold. And we should note that he hasn't really changed his position on a ceasefire deal for about 8 months now. It's the same deal he's been offering the Israelis since December.
All right, from the Miami Herald, huge crowds have gone back to the streets of Venezuela's cities to continue their campaign against President Nicolas Maduro's alleged attempt to steal last week's election and denounce his intensifying crackdown on opposition supporters. Maduro said 2,000 people had been arrested and they would face maximum punishment. Tens of thousands of dissenters packed an avenue in the heart of the capital on Saturday to hear Maria Machado. She is the opposition leader who claims that her candidate for the presidency, Edmundo Gonzalez, was the true winner of the presidential vote. She said, today is a very important day. After 6 days of brutal repression, they thought they would silence us, frighten us, and paralyze us, but we are going to go all the way.
Yeah, though it's unclear how far they can get, Jill, given all the arrests of the protesters. It sort of reminds me of the situation in Iran with the Masa Amini protests. The crackdown from Maduro has been fast and furious. They killed a number of protesters, have arrested some. They've created exclusive prisons in Venezuela specifically for the protesters. Some of these prisons run by gang leaders. And so at times during the day, it looks like Venezuela is back to normal. There have still been some ongoing protests, but we'll see how this sort of unfolds. Machado, fearful of her own arrest, has gone into hiding at times in the last few days. Maduro has refused so far to release any proof of his supposed victory in the election. We're a week in, more than a week in, and still no evidence, no release of voting data, which they normally do in Venezuelan elections. He gave a very angry press conference late last week, looking like he's lost total control here. He's ratcheted up his anger against the opposition like we've never seen before. He said that Machado Gonzalez should be behind bars for what they've done, that he's arrested 2,000 protesters, and he's promising to arrest more. He's sending them right now, the protesters, to 30-year sentences in prison. That's the same sentence they give murderers in Venezuela. At least 14 media workers have been deported. Protests, and as I mentioned, that's gotten a lot of the protests to stop here. Jill, one thing I took note of over the weekend is which countries have officially recognized Maduro's victory. It's a short list, and see if you see anything in common here. Russia, China, Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Nicaragua. Those are the countries that have recognized his victory. They all happen to be run by authoritarians.
That's sort of like a backwards way, Moshe, of asking one of the questions on the news quiz this week. I believe you asked which country did not congratulate him.
Yes.
And I believe the answer was Colombia.
Right. It was incidentally a leftist government, but one that had an open election. And even they, the sort of supposed leftist allies of Maduro in the region, have said, whoa, man, you need to release evidence to prove that you won, because nobody really believes it right now. The issue for Maduro is they're in a very bad economic predicament in Venezuela. There's been super inflation of like 130,000%. The economy's collapsed. A quarter of people have left the country in the past 10 years. Like a quarter. That'd be like the equivalent of 85 million Americans leaving the country. At the same time, in order to survive here, he has to go full authoritarian and crackdown mode, which doesn't necessarily lend itself well to the economy. So we'll see what happens. The U.S. has tried sanctions for a number of years. They promised to lift sanctions for a fair election last year when it was clear he was not intending to do a fair election. We brought the sanctions back. Now there's calls for even more sanctions. So it's not clear what else the Americans can do in this case, or what else anyone else in the region can do. Ultimately, the situation is left to the people of Venezuela and Maduro.
From USA Today, some concerns over the U.S. economy and the potential for a recession. On Friday, the monthly jobs report showed that the unemployment rate last month jumped from 4.1% to 4.3%. While it is still historically low, it is the highest unemployment number in 3 years, and it could be a sign that the U.S. might be in the early stages of a recession, at least based on one measure. It led to a huge sell-off of stocks on Wall Street on Friday. The jobs report is sure to give another spark to debates about whether the Fed is behind the curve here in its handling of the economy. Fed policymakers on Wednesday kept interest rates where they are, still concerned about inflation, but strongly implied that they would be cutting interest rates in September. So remember, we told you that they are trying to get what's called a soft landing of the economy, which means raising interest rates so it brings down inflation, but not so much that it causes a recession. Now the concern is that perhaps they've been too focused on inflation and that they've cooled the economy so much as a way to bring down prices that at the same time they have perhaps started a recession.
Yeah, the soft landing coming in a little hard now.
Kerplunk.
Well, Jill, we talked about for so long, I feel like the first year and a half of this podcast was new recession concerns. And somehow
Recession watch.
There was no recession, right?
Yes.
Well, now there's a concern that there could actually be a recession here because inflation has been stubborn at about 3%. They wanted to get inflation down to 2%. And with that, they wouldn't cut interest rates, which are just about 5% right now, the Fed interest rate. And so they've been holding off till inflation gets lower. But by holding off, you cool the economy too much, you get a recession, you get higher unemployment, which is tolerable to an extent, except until you get into recession mode. And so that's the concern here is that did they wait too long? Did the Fed wait too long to lower interest rates? That's the accusation. The same accusation that they faced a couple of years ago, that they waited too long to raise interest rates to cut inflation. So we'll be watching that meeting closely to see how significant that rate cut is. So there will be a rate cut in September. I think that's pretty clear. Will it be a quarter point? Will it be a half point? What does that mean to inflation? Is they continue to kind of play the dial. If you remember sort of old if you're of a certain generation, you remember the radio stations without digital tuners, you had to turn the wheel to try to get to you have to turn the wheel to try to get to the station. Like in Chicago, we had a station called B96 at 96.3. And if you went slightly too low, you were at 95.5. If you're slightly too high, you were at 97. You had to move the wheel. Anyway, that's what the Fed is trying to do with the economy. It's just move it where you don't get too far on either end.
Moshe, I am picking up what you were putting down here with this radio dial metaphor.
Static on this side, static on that side. We got to get to the point where we can hear the radio station. Anyway.
And then randomly, there will be a radio station in a foreign language that you're well, how did that get thrown in there?
Like a college radio station. You're how did that come up at 96.1 or whatever? Anyway, I've gone on this way too long. The bottom line is this: the jobs number is concerning. There's last week alone, we also got new data that shows that the rate at which companies have hired new workers declined in June. We also got new data that the number of people filing for jobless claims is at the highest level in 11 months. We also got new data that business activity for manufacturers plunged in July. So a bunch of data here they're looking at saying the economy is slowing down. At the same time, if you want to look at the more optimistic viewpoint, the size of the labor force has expanded a lot in July, which means a greater supply potential for the economy for people who are finding jobs. You also saw that the jump in unemployment rate here was more about more people looking for jobs rather than people losing jobs. But of course, that's an indication that people are looking for a second job potentially. So a lot of numbers here we're trying to get a sense of. In the meantime, we're back on recession watch, and we'll see how it goes this fall.
And finally, to all of the Olympics news, this from USA Today. Katie Ledecky, the greatest female swimmer of all time, has won her 4th consecutive Olympic gold medal in the 800-meter freestyle Saturday night, completing her week with her 4th medal in Paris and her 14th in her Olympic career. It came as the U.S. won several relay golds to come out as the winningest country in the pools this year. The United States won 8 gold medals, finishing just ahead of the Australians with 7. Team USA also led the overall swimming medal count with 28 overall medals to Australia's 18. Over in gymnastics, Simone Biles captured yet another gold medal, this one in the women's vault final on Saturday. It is her 3rd gold medal of the Games after leading the U.S. to gold in the team final and winning gold in the all-around final. She does have a chance at 2 more today with the beam and floor individual competitions. It came as several of her teammates also won medals this weekend. Sha'Carri, she won a bronze in vault. And Suni Lee won the bronze in the uneven bars. Lee has a chance at another medal today as well, as does Jordan Chiles.
So, staying with gymnastics, many of us have been loving the story of the U.S. men's gymnast Stephen Nedoroscik, aka Pommel Horse Guy,
aka Clark Kent.
Clark Kent. Why? Because he wears these glasses, then he takes his glasses off and becomes the star on the pommel horse. It really is an incredible story to watch. I don't know if you guys have been able to watch the clips or been watching him live. He's a 25-year-old electrical engineer out of Penn State University. So he wears these glasses until he gets on the pommel horse because he has 2 conditions. One, he's cross-eyed. It's a condition called strabismus, in which his eyes point different directions. And then he also has a genetic condition called coloboma, which means some of the tissue that makes up his eye was missing at birth. So it makes him very sensitive to light. So incidentally, because of all this, an eyewear brand has given him an endorsement deal, and he wears these glasses, and then he takes them off just before he performs on the pommel horse. He won a bronze medal over the weekend. Jill, he's gone viral online, on social media. He's got a whole bunch of followers now on TikTok. He solved a Rubik's Cube live on NBC over the weekend, and he's inspired a lot of kids. Heard reports of people taking their young boys, inspired by his story, to local gyms to begin gymnastics training. So one of those heartwarming stories that we got out of the Olympics, but effectively gymnastics, swimming, basically over at this point in the Olympics. Now our attention turns over to track and field, basketball, and some of the other team sports. Over the weekend, we now officially have our new fastest woman on Earth and fastest man on Earth. The 100-meter is considered the determiner of that. Over on the women's side, American sprinter Sha'Carri Richardson. Remember, she wasn't able to perform in Tokyo. She was able to participate in Paris, and she won the silver over the weekend, losing out to St. Lucia's Julian Alfred. Alfred finished 100 meters in 10.72 seconds. Richardson just slightly behind, 10.87 seconds. There's great video, though, from St. Lucia, the island in the Caribbean, as she claimed the first ever Olympic medal for St. Lucia. So really enjoying it down there. So Sha'Carri Richardson with the silver. Over on the men's side, an American did take gold. That is American Noah Lyles. He is officially now the fastest man on Earth. He won the 100 meter in a very, very close photo finish. Literally, they had to wait on the track, Jill, as they did analysis of this, as he and the silver medalist, Keyshawn Thompson, both finished the race in 9.79 seconds, the same hundredth of a second. So they had to do an analysis to figure out basically the thousandth of the second in order to determine the winner here. So 9.79 seconds for 100 meters. Jill, the finish was really incredible because all 8 men in the race all finished in under 10 seconds. They all broke 10 seconds for the first time. So it just shows you how fast these guys were. Again, they waited for the photo review, and officially Noah Lyles, the fastest man on Earth. And it's the first time the Americans have won the gold in the 100-meter men's final since 2004 back in Athens when Justin Gatlin did it.
Moshe, we always like to follow up about what we're watching, reading, and eating. And we watched a ton of Olympics this weekend. Everyone I know has been glued to the TV, super into the Olympics this year. I don't know what's going on, whether it's just that the U.S. is so dominant or the coverage it's at a good time. I don't know what it is, but everyone's into it.
I also think it's like a really positive story. Jill, several people have messaged me like, hey, can the Olympics last through the election? Because
yes.
That would be really nice. Also, we should note the U.S. so far leading the medal count as of this morning with 71 overall medals. China in second with 45 medals. France in third with 44 medals. That's the overall medal count. The gold medal count. Right now, the U.S. and China are both tied with 19 gold medals. France has 12 gold medals along with Australia. The U.S. is also doing really well. And it's a lot of positive stories, a lot of inspirational stories. And so I think, for once, for the most part, good news coming out of the Olympics so far. All right, now time for On This Day in History. We begin in the year 1858. The first telegraph line across the Atlantic Ocean from the U.S. to Europe was officially laid 2,000 miles on this day. About 11 days later, the President of the United States at that time, James Buchanan, and Queen Victoria exchanged formal introductory and complimentary messages. Unfortunately, the cable stopped working the following month. It would be several years until they got a better cable laid, but still history on this day, deep in the Atlantic Ocean.
I was going to do a sound effect of bring, but it's the telegraph. I don't know what noise that makes.
Jill, you know what? We'll go with it.
I'm picturing like a fax machine or something.
Is this Queen Victoria? Okay. On this day in 1861, Abraham Lincoln, this is a fun fact, by the way, you have Abraham Lincoln to thank for the first federal income tax. Strapped for cash with the Civil War, the government needed money. And so Congress imposes the first ever income tax. It's a 3% tax on annual incomes over $800. At that time. So first income tax, Congress would eventually repeal the income tax in 1871. But then realizing again they needed money in 1909, they passed the 16th Amendment to the Constitution, which sets in place the federal income tax law. And so there you go, the first income tax on this day in history. On this day in 1962, a 36-year-old Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her home in L.A. Empty bottles of pills prescribed to her to treat depression were littered around the room. The LAPD conducted an investigation and found that her death was likely because of self-administered overdose of drugs. That said, like many things in the 60s, conspiracy theories continue to revolve around Monroe's death, including a lot of allegations the Kennedys could have been involved. She allegedly was involved in affairs with both Robert Kennedy and John F. Kennedy, both brothers. And it would later come out that the night before her death, Robert Kennedy, who was an attorney general at the time, visited her home. Her housekeeper later said that they had a major fight that night. Unclear if it was related, unclear if her story was reliable, but still just one of those many conspiracy theories from the 1960s. All right, we end here with music and pop culture history. On this day in 1966, the Beatles released Yellow Submarine and Eleanor Rigby. On this day in 1994, The Little Rascals premieres in theaters 30 years ago today. And then the show The OC premiered 21 years ago today, August 5th, 2003 on Fox, Jill.
Wait, was that your clue?
Yes, we've been on the run, driving in the sun, looking out for number one, California,
okay.
Here we come.
Okay, so I don't think that I aged out of it. I just don't think I ever really knew all of the words to the theme song.
Got it. Listen, excused. That's okay. I hope that some of you did get the clue at the top. But one of those iconic early 2000s TV shows, Misha Barton, Adam Brody, Rachel Bilson, and Olivia Wilde.
All right, everyone. We want to thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
Yes, and a reminder, we have a special pod over on the Interview Pod today, Mo News Interview. Go search it on your podcast app right now. Make sure to subscribe, follow the show, Mo News Interview. It's the inside story of the prisoner exchange last week between the U.S. and Russia.